Transformation of the IT landscape has been driven by infrastructure abstraction. The next step is cloudless computing. Here to discuss cloudless computing with me is HPE's Dave Larson. Dave, thanks so much for joining us.
It's great to be here, Paul.
Great. Now, before we get into cloudless computing, what I thought we might do is maybe take a little journey back 10 years. Can you take us through some of the history in terms of how we got to where we are today?
Yeah, we can start a little bit beyond that. We'll go a little further back and realize that the computing paradigm for many decades didn't change, right? We had bare metal.
Yeah.
And everyone knew what that meant. They knew what the complexity was of how to build things. And we ran into problems as we wanted to scale. As applications and the internet evolved, all of a sudden we needed new capabilities.
What were some of those capabilities?
About a decade ago, we had something come along that was called virtualization, virtual machines.
Yeah.
And virtual machines changed the landscape, and they've pretty much been a mainstream environment in all enterprises and all businesses since. More recently, the community introduced something called containers. Containers allow you to care about less. Just as virtualization allows you to not care so much about the hardware and take better advantage of it, containers allow you not to care about the operating system. You go a step further, more recently, and this is really early adopter phase stuff, we have something called serverless. So Google Function, AWS Lambda, this is just actually code.
So there are still servers?
There are still servers. You know, serverless is a provocative term that's implied that you don't need to worry about the servers, but of course, there are still servers. And this serverless code just executes, it attests to its execution, and you pay for it however many times you transact it.
So we've got this history really of a constant abstraction away from infrastructure, hardware, to these more software-oriented concepts. That all sounds great in principle. What have been some of the maybe negative or unforeseen consequences of that transformation?
Well, the consequences of it is that every single one of those transitions has arisen a new modality, a new methodology of developing applications. Customers, developers had to go and figure out how to map their world into it. Cloud is no different. The cloud emerged over the last decade, and people have accommodated it over time, right? It's really an interesting phenomenon how applications have migrated to that environment, but not without cost. The cloud environments, while they have been tremendously beneficial, they come with some trade-offs, some concessions, and it's usually concessions to the control. You let that happen with the cloud provider themselves, and you have to adapt to less visibility, different realms of security, and sometimes there are regulatory implications of what that might mean for an enterprise.
Great, so I guess that gets us to cloudless computing. So what is cloudless computing, and how does it address some of the concerns you just highlighted?
Yeah, if you look at the trajectory of innovation, as I just highlighted, from bare metal, virtual machines, container, and serverless, it's pretty obvious that we're converging somewhere. And where we're converging is on an open compute environment that application developers can use however it best meets their business needs. Cloudless is the end goal that we're headed to, but it will require us to change the way we think about how software is deployed, how it's developed, how it's consumed. Really, cloudless is about democratizing and simplifying the entire application development landscape for our customers and partners.
So that answer sounds like the sort of answer we'd give to a business person if they were to ask, what is cloudless computing if you were to talk to an architect? What is it?
Yeah, that's a good point. Cloudless is based on something that we describe as three fabrics. The first is a trust fabric. The trust fabric is the zero trust framework that cloudless is based on. And zero trust is important. What it allows is that all the application components that are part of the cloudless environment know and can fully attest mutually whether or not they should be talking to each other. It is zero trust by nature. It is absolutely will not talk to something that is an outside interloper. The second is a connectivity fabric. And in this case, we're not talking about a network. We're talking about a way of communicating, an open way of saying that all of the constituent components of the application, whether it's a container, whether it's a virtual machine, whether it's a bare metal application, should be able to reach each other regardless of whether they're in the same data center or whether they're in the same country. Finally, there's a value fabric. And now the value fabric is really an abstract concept. It's not a fabric at all. It's the community that we know is going to build cloudless with us. And it's the economic engine and innovation engine that will emerge as a result of the community working together to deliver this new and open paradigm.
So how does Cloudless compare to some of the other initiatives I've heard about that sound similar, whether it be like the cloud native movement or hybrid, some of those other
like the Cloud Native Computing Foundation.
Yeah.
Cloud Native Computing Foundation is an organization of hundreds of companies with billions of dollars of invested capital, driving trillions of dollars of economic activity in our world. But while it's a fabulous engine for innovation, it's largely been mostly leveraged by the big operators.
Okay.
The big public clouds, the big SaaS, the big service providers. And the reason for that is that they have the scale and the IT capital and the ability to do things at very large scale. So really, smaller entities, the enterprises, small business, municipalities, have sort of been left out. The only way they can gain access to this innovation is to gain access to it in the public cloud itself.
So who is the primary audience for the Cloudless initiative?
Our primary audience is two. Our first and foremost audience is our customers, because those are the ones that drive our business. But in reality, we have a much bigger opportunity with our partner ecosystem. The partner ecosystem and the open source community itself is where we want to work in cooperation to make this new vision of open and boundaryless cloud computing emerge.
So when Antonio talked about it, he mentioned it really in the context of a strategy. When will it be available, or is some of the components available today?
I would say some of the underpinnings of it are available now and have been available for some time. Let me give you an example.
Please.
We introduced 2 years ago on our ProLiant platform a silicon root of trust. The silicon root of trust is a way that we can have a unique and verifiable fingerprint associated with every piece of hardware that we sell.
I want to pause you there. Why is that important?
The silicon root of trust, if you cannot anchor your security policy in a manner that you can know and attest what your software is running on, you don't know what compromise vectors are there. And it's very difficult to trust the software if you cannot trust the hardware.
Understood.
I would really say that the silicon root of trust is the basis upon which a new foundation in zero trust security will emerge.
That's so important. And then that's some of the technology you've been working on today. What's the future trajectory for the strategy then?
Well, the future trajectory for the strategy is to take the innovations that we brought to market, like silicon root of trust, innovations that we brought to market in the area of analytics, like InfoSight, as a service consumption models like GreenLake that allow you to consume as a service like you can in the cloud, but you can do that on your own private estate, in your own hosting facility. Take those innovations that we have already brought to market and are already available and start to utilize some of them to go after the cloud native computing development community to build new value. And one of the real examples of that will be utilizing silicon root of trust in federation with the zero trust capabilities of container orchestrators.
Yep.
Marry those together so that we can get zero trust infrastructure and software working together.
Now when we talk about silicon root of trust, we're starting to talk about hardware and infrastructure. Obviously HPE is one of the premier infrastructure providers on the planet. How much of this technology will be proprietary to HPE?
Well, our silicon root of trust is something that we built for our servers. It's embedded on our motherboards, and it allows us to attest to all the components that are part of the server. Whether that's a fan, whether it's a disk drive, whether it's the CPU itself, we can tell you the provenance of it and what its history has been. Has it been swapped out? Has it been upgraded? Has its firmware changed? All of that is critical for us.
So we're able to basically trace the provenance of infrastructure firmware from the time it's created through till the time it's...
Literally cradle to grave.
Got it.
And without the ability to do that, it's very hard to make strong security claims about the underlying application environment that's running in that hardware.
Which is so important. Before we wrap up, I've got a question about, I suppose, how do we mobilize the notion of Cloudless in our organization? There seems to be so many stakeholders, application development teams, architects. I mean, really even procurement are getting involved in the process because you need to make sure that the infrastructure you're buying conforms to the appropriate standards. How do people get started? How do we as an industry start to work towards Cloudless?
Engage the conversation. We're starting with the partner community.
Yeah.
The real call to action in terms of everything that we're doing with our announcement activity around Cloudless here at the show is to get the partner community aware of the fact that we're looking to cooperate with them. And that also goes for the open source development community. The Cloud Native Computing Foundation, as you mentioned earlier, this is a signal to them that we are coming back. We want to work with them and build an open environment that allows the software that they're developing to thrive in more environments than the public cloud where they have done so far.
So you anticipate these capabilities finding their way into the open source community?
Absolutely. I mean, we are a member of the Open Compute platform, where we are a member of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. We are committed to driving this as an open initiative. We will put our designs into the environment, and we will put the APIs, and we'll make sure that we are working in a way that everyone can participate in this framework.
I'm going to throw you a bit of an unanticipated curveball
That's
here.
fine.
You mentioned serverless doesn't, I guess, get rid of servers. Cloudless obviously doesn't mean the end of cloud.
Absolutely not. It is a tongue-in-cheek and very similar way to be a little bit provocative and controversial to drive the news cycle.
I love it. Sounds fantastic. If people are interested in learning more, where can they go?
They go to hpe.com, go to enterprise.next, and sign up for our newsletter, and I'm sure you'll be seeing lots of activity from us on this particular topic.
Absolutely fabulous. Dave, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks so much for watching.